Picture this. It is a windless morning in January of 1716. The sun rises over a stretch of Florida coast the Spanish call Palmar de Ais, a name that means little more than the palm grove of the reef. The air smells of tar and rotting seaweed. Along a mile of white sand, tents made from sailcloth flap in the breeze, and beside them, mounds of something else, wet coins, barrels of coins, sacks of coins, silver 8 real pieces, freshly hauled up from the seabed. A garrison of some 60 Spanish soldiers guards them, most of them still asleep, some cooking breakfast over low fires. Around them, hundreds of indigenous and enslaved African divers wait for the day's dive. Out on the sea, a ridge of black canvas moves against the horizon. 3 sloops, low and fast, are gliding in with the tide. Some 300 armed men crouch behind the gunwales, muskets across their knees. Their captain is a Jamaica-based privateer, and his name is Henry Jennings. Within the hour, the Spanish garrison will be routed almost without a shot, and Jennings' men will be shoveling roughly 120,000 pieces of 8 into the holds of their ships. And this is only the first of several raids. Before the year is out, Jennings and the men who follow him will have taken silver worth, by Spanish reckoning, nearly £100,000 sterling, enough, at 18th century prices, to buy an entire small colony. But here is the question we are going to try to answer today. Where did it all go? Not into a hole in the sand, not into a chest marked with an X on a map, not to the bottom of a cave on some jungle island. The gold and silver taken by the Golden Age pirates, men like Blackbeard, Charles Vane, Sam Bellamy, Calico Jack Rackham, was not buried. It was spent. It was traded. It was laundered. And within months, it disappeared into the vaults and the pockets of some of the most respected merchants in the English-speaking Atlantic. This is the story of the black market of Nassau, and of who really got rich when pirates went to sea. To understand what happened in Nassau, you have to understand what had just ended in Europe. For 11 years, from 1701 to 1713, the great powers of Europe had torn each other apart over who would sit on the throne of Spain. It was called the War of the Spanish Succession, and it involved almost every European monarchy and every European colony. When Britain fought France and Spain at sea, she did not do it with the Royal Navy alone. She did it with privateers, private ships whose owners held official papers called letters of marque, authorizing them to attack enemy merchant vessels and keep a share of the proceeds. For over a decade, thousands of English, Scottish, and colonial-born sailors made their living this way. When the war ended, with the Peace of Utrecht in 1713, all of them, all at once, found themselves out of a job. The Royal Navy shrank from around 50,000 sailors in 1712 to fewer than 14,000 by 1715. The merchant marine could absorb only a fraction of the surplus, at wages that had dropped by half or more. Sea captains who had commanded 6-gun sloops for the Crown were suddenly being offered berths as ordinary hands in the Newfoundland cod trade, sleeping in leaking forecastles for £1 a day. Meanwhile, in July of 1715, a fleet of 11 Spanish ships, carrying the accumulated silver and gold from Mexico and Peru, nearly 7 million pesos worth, sailed out of Havana bound for Cadiz. They ran into a hurricane off the coast of Florida on the last night of the month. 10 of them were driven onto the reefs and destroyed. One ship, a French escort called the Griffon, ran ahead of the storm at the last moment and made it clear. Word travelled fast. Within weeks, every unemployed privateer, every out-of-work sailor, every dock rat in the West Indies and along the American seaboard was talking about the same thing. A river of silver spilled across 100 miles of Florida coast, in shallow water, guarded by only a handful of Spaniards. That river of silver would need a place to come ashore, and it needed a place where no one would ask questions. That place was Nassau. Nassau sits on the northern edge of the island of New Providence, in the Bahamas. In 1715, the town, if you could call it a town, was a scattering of wooden shacks and canvas tents around a curving harbour with a shallow bar. The bar was the whole point. Royal Navy frigates drew too much water to cross it, but sloops and smaller vessels could slip in and out with ease. Behind the harbour, a low ridge protected the anchorage from Atlantic swells. Fresh water bubbled up from 3 or 4 small springs. It was, in short, a nearly perfect pirate haven. By late 1715, the population had swelled from a few hundred loyal settlers to something between 1,000 and 2,000 men, and a handful of women, most of them living outside any recognizable form of law. The rightful deputy governor, a man named Thomas Walker, had spent the previous year trying to arrest pirates and confiscate their goods. Backed by Henry Jennings and others, a group of them marched into Walker's house, threatened his family, and drove him from the island. He fled to South Carolina and never returned. With Walker gone, Nassau was, in effect, a pirate republic. Not a democracy in the modern sense, but a rough confederation of ship captains who signed articles among their crews and made collective decisions in taverns pitched on the beach. The men who led it in those first months are names you may already know. Benjamin Hornigold, a hard, disciplined Norfolk-born sailor, commanded a small sloop called the Ranger and refused, at first, to attack English ships. Henry Jennings, the wealthy Jamaica-based privateer turned raider, sailed his flagship, the sloop Barsheba, in company with 2 other vessels, one of them the Eagle under John Wills. And around them orbited a cast of younger, hungrier men. Edward Thash, whom the world would come to know as Blackbeard, sailing at first under Hornigold. Charles Vane, cruel, clever, utterly without loyalty. Samuel Bellamy, the so-called Prince of Pirates, a Devon-born Englishman in his late 20s who had settled in Cape Cod. Later, there would be Calico Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, Mary Read. But these are the names you know because Hollywood needed them. The names Hollywood did not want to remember belong to the other side of the ledger. Those are the names we are going to talk about now. Before we get there, a quick word. Everything in today's video is drawn from documented sources, colonial governors, letters, Board of Trade records, Vice Admiralty Court transcripts, and the ongoing archaeological work at Nassau, at Beaufort Inlet, where the Queen Anne's Revenge sank, and off Cape Cod, where Sam Bellamy's Wider still gives up her secrets. I have gathered the key primary and secondary sources for this era into a free reader's document I call the Black Flag Codex. The link and the QR code you can see on screen now are in the description. If you want to trace this story yourself, that is where to start. Now, back to Nassau, and to a Spanish silver coin, freshly minted in the mountains of Peru, that is about to change hands more times in 18 months than most coins do in a lifetime. Let us follow one piece of 8, just one. It begins its life not on the sea, but in a mountain in the highlands of what is now Bolivia. The mountain is called Cerro Rico, the Rich Hill, and it looms above the city of Potosi at an altitude of over 4,000 meters. In the year 1714, an indigenous laborer, a mitayo, hauls ore from a shaft in that mountain. The ore is smelted, refined with mercury from Huancavelica, and cast into ingots. Those ingots are hammered and cut and stamped, by hand, into round silver coins bearing the arms of Philip V of Spain and the mint mark of Potosi. Each coin weighs about 27 grams. Each is worth 8 reals. In English, we call it a piece of 8. Our coin is bagged with tens of thousands of others. It travels by mule train down to the Pacific coast, then by ship up to Panama, then across the isthmus by another mule train, and finally onto a Spanish galleon at Portobello. From there it sails to Havana, where it is loaded into the treasure fleet of 1715, under the command of General Juan Esteban de Ubila. On the night of July 31st, 1715, the hurricane strikes. Our coin, along with millions of others, spills onto the seabed off the Florida coast. For 5 months, Spanish salvors, working with enslaved indigenous and African divers, haul silver up from the wrecks and stack it on the beach at Palmar de Ais. Then, on the morning we opened with, Henry Jennings arrives with his 3 sloops. the Spanish flee inland. Jennings takes not only what has been salvaged on the beach, he also takes the silver stored in a nearby storehouse. Our coin, along with 120,000 of its brothers, is loaded aboard the Beersheba and sailed back to Nassau. This is where the interesting part begins, because Jennings does not, contrary to every pirate story you have ever seen, bury the coin. He unloads it. In Nassau harbour, he splits it. First, according to the articles agreed to by his crew, captain and quartermaster get more. Ordinary hands 1 share each. Gunners and carpenters slightly more. Our coin, let us say, ends up in the pocket of an ordinary sailor. Let us call him Thomas Porter, an English merchant seaman who has been unemployed since Utrecht. Porter takes it ashore. And here is where the ghost of the black market takes shape. Nassau, in 1716 and 1717, is not just a haven, it is a marketplace. And the buyers who come there are not other pirates. They are formally respectable men. Sloops from Charlestown, in the Carolina colony, arrive weekly, sometimes daily. Their captains are known men, listed on the colony's shipping registers, holding customs certificates. They come loaded with rum, gunpowder, sailcloth, food, iron tools, medicine, and news. They leave loaded with silver, gold dust, ivory from raided African ships, silk from the East India trade, sugar from captured Portuguese and French merchantmen. On paper, their cargo manifests, if they file them at all, describe generic goods. In practice, the entire economic engine of a small English colonial port on the mainland is being fed by piracy. Our coin, Thomas Porter's share, is traded to one of these Charleston captains in exchange for a bottle of rum, a pair of boots, some fresh salt beef, and perhaps the company of a woman for the evening. The captain sails back to Charlestown. There, our coin passes to a merchant, a man like Chidley Bayard of Jamaica, or one of his counterparts in the Carolinas. Bayard was a real man, one of the wealthiest merchants in the West Indies at the time, and according to letters preserved in the British colonial papers, a known backer of Henry Jennings' raid in the first place. He had put up capital. He took a share, and when the goods came back, he moved them into the legitimate colonial trading network as if they had come from anywhere else. Once our coin reaches the merchant's counting house, it is now indistinguishable from any other Spanish silver in the colonies, because Spanish silver was, in fact, the primary hard currency of British North America. It was legal tender in Massachusetts, in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Virginia. It circulated at fixed exchange rates against colonial paper money. A merchant paying taxes in pieces of 8 was paying in the exact same coins the pirates had brought in. No one asked, and no one could tell. Our coin might now be shipped north. A merchant in Charlestown owes a debt to a factor in New York. He pays it in silver. The New York factor uses it to buy wheat from a farmer up the Hudson, who uses it to pay his rent to a Dutch landlord, who uses it to buy Madeira wine from a Boston shipper, who uses it to pay a shipwright in Salem, who uses it to buy salt cod, who uses it, in turn, to send his son to Harvard College. Somewhere along that chain, our coin has become clean, not through any deliberate act of laundering, but through the simple, quiet mechanism of a colonial economy hungry for hard silver. An economy where governors from New York down to South Carolina were themselves, in some cases, taking direct payments from pirates in exchange for looking the other way. The most famous example was actually a generation earlier. Benjamin Fletcher, royal governor of New York in the 1690s, who protected pirates like Thomas Tew in exchange for what one investigator later called regular presents of gold coin and jewels. But the pattern he set, corrupt governor, complicit merchant class, silent customs office, was the pattern the Nassau captains counted on. And it held. The illusion of pirate treasure, of chests full of gold hidden in the sand, is one of the most durable myths in Western culture. But it is precisely that, a myth. The historical record shows almost no evidence of any Golden Age pirate burying significant treasure anywhere. Here we have to be careful, Because the legend is beloved, and legends persist for reasons. The one, single, well-documented case of a pirate burying treasure is Captain William Kidd, who in 1699 buried a modest cache of gold and silver on Gardiner's Island, off the eastern tip of Long Island. The owner of the island, John Gardiner, later dug it up and turned it over to the authorities as evidence at Kidd's trial. It amounted to a few £100s of gold and silver, a fortune to an ordinary man, but a trivial sum next to what Kidd had already spent, sold and distributed. And Kidd himself was not, in any strict sense, a Nassau pirate. He predated the Republic by more than a decade. For the men of Nassau, Jennings, Hornigold, Blackbeard, Bellamy, Vane, Rackham, there is no serious archaeological or documentary evidence of buried hoards. When the Wider, Sam Bellamy's flagship, went down off Cape Cod on April 26 in 1717, she took with her the accumulated plunder of more than 50 vessels. When Barry Clifford's team began excavating the wreck site in 1984, they recovered thousands of coins, gold dust, small ingots, jewellery, and personal effects. What they found on the seabed matches, item by item, category by category, what the sources say pirates spent, traded, and carried. It does not match a treasure chest full of doubloons. It matches a working currency in motion. The reason is simple. Burying treasure only makes sense if you have nowhere to put it, and no one you trust to spend it with. The men in Nassau had both. They had a bank of sorts, the merchant class of half a dozen colonies who would happily convert stolen silver into rum, sail, powder, women, and, when the time came, into pardons from the crown, because that too was for sale. When Woodes Rogers arrived at Nassau in late July of 1718, as the newly appointed royal governor, he came bearing the king's pardon, a promise of legal amnesty for any pirate who surrendered by a set date. Some 600 men accepted. A few of them, Hornigold most famously, actually turned pirate hunter and went to work for the crown chasing down their old friends. What historians less often note is what those men did with the money they had earned in the previous 2 years. They bought land, they bought sloops of their own, in their own names, and entered the legal trade. They opened taverns. They set up shops in Kingston and Bermuda and Charlestown. The Nassau silver flowed on, wearing new clothes. The gold, in other words, did not vanish. It never had. It was folded, quietly and permanently, into the ordinary commerce of the 18th century Atlantic. The pirates got the songs, the merchants got the wealth, and the coin we followed, well, that coin, or one just like it, might be sitting in a museum drawer in Massachusetts today, catalogued as colonial-era Spanish silver, provenance unknown. Lead magnet plug, QR plus link on screen. If you want to see the actual account books, the Vice Admiralty transcripts, and the customs records that document this trade, they are collected and cited in the Black Flag Codex, the free reader's document I mentioned earlier. The link is in the description below. If you know the story of Nassau at all, you probably know it from the screen. The Star series Black Sails, which ran from 2014 to 2017, was set precisely in this world. Woodes Rogers arriving, Charles Vane holding out, Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, Jack Rackham. The show got a surprising amount of the political texture right, but it, too, told a story of hidden Spanish gold as the driving prize. Beyond Black Sails, the master image of pirate treasure comes from a single novel, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, published in 1883. Stevenson invented, almost single-handedly, most of what modern audiences think they know about piracy: the treasure map with the X, the wooden leg, the parrot on the shoulder, the black spot, the mutinous crew rowing to a jungle island to dig up doubloons under a lightning-split tree. None of it was drawn from historical record. It was drawn from a watercolour map Stevenson had sketched to amuse his stepson. From that map came the novel, and from the novel came, eventually, everything else. Everything else means the Pirates of the Caribbean films, whose central plot device is a chest of cursed Aztec gold. It means the buried treasure conceit at the heart of 1,000 adventure stories, from Peter Pan to the Goonies. It means, in a sense, the entire modern industry of pirate cosplay. The historical Nassau captains would have found it baffling. Their world was one of quick sails, hard currency, hungry merchants, and short lives. Not a single one of them, so far as any surviving document can tell us, drew a map to their gold, because they did not need one. Their gold was not somewhere else. It was moving, right now, down a river of commerce that emptied, in the end, into the counting houses of very rich men who never once stepped aboard a pirate ship. There is something worth saying about all this, at the end. When we picture the golden age of piracy, we picture the sea. We picture the black flag, the boarding action, the powder smoke, the cutlass on the deck. We picture, above all, the man who took what he wanted. The pirate as an image of a kind of savage economic freedom. But the real economy of piracy was almost never at sea. The real economy was on land. It was in the counting houses of Charlestown and New York and Newport and Kingston, where clerks entered figures into ledgers in careful copperplate script. It was in the offices of colonial governors, some of whom were as deep in the trade as any man who ever raised a Jolly Roger. It was in the pardons issued by the Crown, which were themselves a kind of financial instrument, converting stolen silver into legitimate capital at the stroke of a pen. The pirates hanged. Blackbeard was shot and beheaded on November 22nd, 1718, at Ocracoke Inlet. Charles Vane was hanged at Gallows Point, Port Royal, in March of 1721. Jack Rackham was hanged at the same place in November of 1720, and his body left in an iron gibbet on a small quay at the mouth of the harbour. The names we remember are the names of men who died young, mostly poor, mostly forgotten by the merchants who had grown fat off their raids. The gold did not go to the bottom of the sea, and it did not go into a hole under a palm tree. It went where money always goes. It went to the men on shore who could count. And so, tonight, when you close your eyes and picture the coast of Florida in the summer of 1716, do not picture a lonely pirate digging a hole in a moonlit beach. Picture, instead, a small sloop, laden low with barrels of silver, sliding into the harbour at Nassau on a hot southerly wind. Picture the crew stepping ashore into the noise and smoke of tavern tents. Picture a lean, well-dressed man in a linen coat, standing quietly at the edge of the beach, waiting. He has a bill of lading folded in his coat, a house in Charlestown, and a wife who does not ask him where the silver comes from. Picture the coin passing, without ceremony, from the sailor's rough hand into the merchant's clean one. Picture, in the years that follow, that coin travelling north, to Boston, to New York, to Salem, passing from hand to hand, ledger to ledger, growing quieter and quieter, until at last no one alive remembers where it came from. The wind still blows across the harbour at Nassau. The shacks and the tents are long gone. The silver is not in the sand, and it never was. It is with us still. In the walls of old houses, in the vaults of old banks, in the museum cases of old cities. And every so often, on a clear night, when the tide is running out, if you stand on the beach where Jennings landed and listen very carefully, you can almost hear it. The soft, dry sound of coins moving on.